You join me again today with yet another MPV review. Seems to be the theme of 2022 here. Today we're with the Nissan Livina VL and we want to answer one question. What's in it for Nissan for rebadging the Mitsubishi Xpander? Now I'm going to cut straight to the chase and let's talk about how the Livina drives, rides, and feels on the road in general. I'm not gonna mince any words here, folks. It feels exactly like an Xpander. Now some of you guys are gonna be disappointed because you guys were probably looking for some distinction between the two. On the flip side, there are good points to it because as it is, the Xpander rides pretty well. The suspension damping is spot on as far as MPVs are concerned. And the steering, because it's so light, it's easy to twirl around tight parking spaces. And speaking of tight parking spaces, it shouldn't stress you out too much because the Livina, like the Xpander, has a pretty tight turning circle. So what about performance? It's a 1.5 liter engine, it's got a little over 100 horsepower, and just about 140 Newton meters of torque. Now, how do those numbers translate? Because this car uses a 4-speed automatic transmission, it actually responds quite well. The gearing is long, yes, but because there is a transmission, it just feels more responsive than your typical CVT. Despite not having a CVT that's designed to maximize fuel economy, the Livina still delivers pretty good numbers. See, in heavy traffic, the Livina does about 8.5–9 kilometers per liter. And if traffic is lighter, like where we are in now, it's still returning about 12 to 13 kilometers per liter. And if you think the interior experience is going to be different compared to the Xpander, well, you're going to be a bit disappointed because everything you see here is exactly like the pre-facelift Xpander. Okay, when I say everything, I mean that in terms of design. You have that swooping dash top, you have this shelf right above the glove box, you also have the design patterns right on the dashboard face, and even the door panels. Since it does have the same layout as the Xpander, ergonomics are pretty good. It's simple, it's straightforward, you got your dials here. Now, a few changes in here are mainly the plastic wood paneling and your touchscreen. And I have to say, it's something I would find in 2012 and not 2022. If you look at the graphics and the icons and all that, it really does look more like an aftermarket thing rather than an OE product. You really can't control anything to do with the car with it. Yes, it does have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. However, if you have a newer model iPhone, it won't be able to read it. It can only handle up to iOS 13, at least for this particular unit, so that's rather unusual. Although I did notice this. When you start it up, when you boot up the ignition, the car that appears there actually does have a Nissan badge, so that is something. And it's pretty much the same story when you sit back here, but that's not entirely a bad thing because the Mitsubishi Xpander is actually pretty good from the rear purchase. So the Livina also inherits the good amount of legroom, foot space, you got decent hip room, and of course you got stacks of headroom. I mean, this is an MPV after all. You also get this rather interesting pocket arrangement, the back of the driver's seat. So you get 3 pockets, so one for smaller items, one for slightly wider items, and another one if you need a deeper pocket. Although on the other side of the seat, you only get 1 pocket. As for the seats, they're firm-ish, but they're not too firm that you're gonna feel a bit of pain in your tailbone, but also they're not too soft because on a longer trip, if you have a softer seat, it's just gonna be more uncomfortable. The cushions are just right. And if you're wondering how to fold down these seats, it's pretty straightforward. All you gotta do is pull this tab and you just let gravity take over the rest. And this tumbles forward if you need access to the 3rd row. And speaking of the 3rd row, you might as well check it out too. As for the 3rd row, you know what this feel is going to be. It's really best reserved for children or small adults. Now, I am 5'3" and a bit, and it's okay. It's not exactly stretch out room here, but what do you expect? It's a subcompact MPV. Footroom is actually pretty big. That's actually what I like about the Livina and the Xpander. Headroom, well, it's not exactly great. I have about this much left if I lean all the way back. So let's say you're 5'5", 5'6", you might find yourself rushing the headliner a little bit. But I do have to give points for having a few more amenities back here. So you got a little cubby space here and your cup holders and one 120-volt socket. So why would you choose the Livina over the Xpander knowing that this is more expensive? Well, perhaps it's going to be a matter of preference, whether it comes to exterior design, interior design, or maybe the Nissan showroom just has a better deal compared to the Mitsubishi showroom. But really, this is a very competent car, and so is the Xpander. If I called this a bad car, that would mean I'm calling the Xpander a bad car. But the thing is, the Livina nails all the basics. It has all the pros of the Xpander. It's spacious, it's got a flexible interior, I love the fold flat seats, and I love the cubby spaces just about everywhere. As for the cons, well, they're going to be similar to the Xpander. Now, there are some features here that aren't seen on other models, and at the same time, there's strange omissions too, such as they removed the cruise control in this one, and they removed the rear defogger for some reason. But really, the biggest con here would be the price, because again, it is more expensive than the Mitsubishi. And again, it's all going to boil down to preference. Do you prefer the look of the Livina more, or would you rather go for the Mitsubishi since that's the updated and facelifted look? But for me, perhaps a more interesting solution to this would have been if Nissan brought in Renault's mini MPV. Now we're going to show it to you, and it's called the Triber. The Renault Triber is a similarly sized, small 7-seat MPV that looks totally different from the Xpander. So it would be interesting if Nissan rebadged that instead of the Xpander. Now, before you nail us for saying, oh, you guys are just anti-Nissan, well, we'll end with this. We actually like several of Nissan's products. You take a look at the Terra, and the Terra has been so comprehensively facelifted, it practically feels like an all-new model. Then you look at the Almera, which was such a huge step up from the previous generation. And then, of course, we have to mention the Kicks, which is revolutionary in just about every way, and it could be just the key for electrification in the Philippines. As for the Livina, really, it does its role as part of the alliance, but for us consumers, well, it's up to you if you want to buy it or not. If I'm going to give this car a rating, well, it'll have to be a 6.5 out of 10.